Jake Harrison sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien council members argue about humanity like they were discussing livestock. The massive chamber stretched high above him, with its gleaming walls and floating platforms, where the older alien races looked down at the newer species with obvious disgust. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 3 years now, and every single day felt like a fresh insult. The reptilian Speaker Zethkar raised his clawed hand, and the arguing stopped. His yellow eyes swept across the human delegation, with the same look Jake might give to insects crawling on his dinner plate. Behind Jake sat Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker, taking notes on her tablet, while Dr. Alex Kim and Captain Roy Bennett kept their faces carefully blank. They had all learned not to show emotion during these meetings, because the aliens saw any human reaction as proof of their primitive nature. The human proposal for equal representation is denied again, Zethkar announced in his hissing voice. The Council finds no merit in allowing such a young species to have the same voice as civilizations that have existed for millions of years. Jake felt his jaw muscles tighten, but he kept his expression calm. This was the 15th time in 2 years that humanity had asked for equal representation, and the 15th time they had been rejected. It did not matter that human scientists had created the fusion reactors that powered half the galaxy. It did not matter that human engineers had built the defensive platforms protecting dozens of worlds. It did not matter that human doctors had found cures for 3 major galactic plagues. To the Council, humans were still the newcomers who should be grateful for whatever scraps they were thrown. Counselor Vexthal from the hegemony leaned forward on his platform. His blue skin seemed to glow with smugness as he spoke. Perhaps the humans fail to understand their place in the natural order. They have been part of galactic society for barely 50 years, while the founding races have guided civilization for eons. Young species must learn patience and humility. The other council members made sounds of agreement. Jake watched as the ethereals nodded their translucent heads, and the Dominion representatives clicked their mandibles in approval. Every alien face in the chamber showed the same expression of condescending tolerance that Jake had grown to hate. Furthermore, Vexthal continued, humans should consider themselves fortunate to serve in any capacity. Many species wait centuries before being granted even observer status. The fact that humans are allowed to speak at all demonstrates the Council's generous nature. That did it. Jake stood up slowly and felt every alien eye in the chamber focus on him. The rules said that lower species could only speak when given permission, but Jake no longer cared about their rules. Lisa Parker looked up from her tablet with worry in her eyes, while Alex Kim shifted nervously in his seat. With respect, Counselor Vexthal, Jake said in a voice that carried no respect at all, humanity has contributed more to galactic civilization in 50 years than some council members have in the last 1,000. A wave of shocked silence rippled through the chamber. Several alien delegates made outraged noises, while others simply stared. Zethkar's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. The human forgets his place, the speaker hissed. Perhaps this is why younger species require guidance from their betters. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. Their betters. These aliens who had spent the last 3 years treating humans like trained animals thought of themselves as humanity's betters. He looked around the chamber at all the technology that humans had invented or improved. The air recycling systems were based on human designs. The communication arrays used human quantum entanglement principles. Even the chairs they sat in were manufactured in human factories. Our betters, Jake repeated slowly. Tell me, Counselor, when was the last time your species invented something that did not require human assistance to function properly? The chamber erupted in angry alien voices. Delegates stood on their platforms, gesturing wildly, while translators struggled to keep up with the flood of outraged words. Zethkar slammed his gavel repeatedly, but the noise continued. Lisa Parker grabbed Jake's arm. "Sir, we should leave before this gets worse." Jake nodded, but he was not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Counselor Vexthal, who was speaking rapidly into a communication device. Other council members were doing the same thing, and Jake realized they were already planning some kind of punishment for his outburst. These aliens would never change. They would never see humans as equals, no matter what humanity accomplished. As the delegation gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He activated his secure communicator and sent a short message to Earth using a code that only a handful of people knew. The message was simple, but its implications were enormous. "Protocol 7, it's time." The reply came back within minutes. "Confirmed. Initiating withdrawal procedures. Estimated completion 18 months. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. Protocol 7 had been developed years ago as a contingency plan that most people hoped would never be used. It was humanity's way of answering the question of what would happen if galactic civilization proved to be irredeemably hostile to human interests. The answer was simple. Humanity would leave. As they walked through the corridors of the council building, Lisa Parker caught up with Jake. "Sir, what was that message about?" "Nothing important," Jake replied. "Just updating Earth on today's proceedings." But it was much more than that. Across human space, military commanders and civilian leaders were receiving coded orders. Research. Stations would begin experiencing equipment failures. Mining operations would report safety concerns requiring evacuation. Agricultural worlds would discover crop diseases necessitating immediate quarantine procedures. To outside observers, it would look like a series of unfortunate coincidences. Only a few humans would know the truth. Humanity was going home. The aliens could keep their counsel and their arrogance and their sense of superiority. They would soon learn what the galaxy looked like without human innovation, human protection, and human dedication. Jake suspected it would be a very educational experience for species that considered themselves to be humanity's betters. He just hoped they would survive the lesson. Admiral Kate Johnson stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the massive holographic display that showed human positions across 47 star systems. Each blue dot represented a human facility, colony, or military installation, and there were thousands of them scattered throughout council space. In 3 months, every single one of those dots would disappear. The withdrawal had begun exactly as planned. Dr. Susan Roberts, the galaxy's leading expert on alien biology, had requested extended leave to visit her family on Earth. The council approved it without question because they saw it as normal human sentimentality. They did not know that Susan was currently supervising the evacuation of the xenobiology research station in the Vega system, where she had spent the last 8 years developing treatments for alien diseases. Commander Rick Stevens had also received approval for his transfer back to Earth for what he called domestic duties. The council bureaucrats who processed his paperwork had no idea that Rick was the chief architect of the defensive grid protecting 12 systems from raiders and hostile forces. His departure meant that the most sophisticated early warning network in the galaxy would soon go offline. Kate watched her communications officer as reports flowed in from across human space. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly because humans had always been good at logistics and planning. While other species argued about jurisdiction and authority, humans simply got things done. On the mining world of Kepler-7, plant manager Bill Thompson reported equipment failures in all major extraction facilities. The alien overseers grumbled about human incompetence, but approved the temporary shutdown for repairs. They did not question why the repair teams were loading entire mining rigs onto transport ships instead of fixing them in place, in the Santori agricultural complex. Director Nancy Wells discovered what appeared to be a devastating crop disease, spreading through the hydroponic farms that fed 6 systems. The alien health officials agreed that immediate evacuation was necessary to prevent contamination. They watched as humans loaded farming equipment and seed banks onto cargo vessels, thinking they were simply removing infected materials. The research facilities were the easiest to evacuate because scientists always had equipment that needed careful handling. Dr. Carl Davis packed up his quantum physics laboratory on Station Alpha by claiming that sensitive instruments required calibration on Earth. Professor Mary Stewart moved her entire archaeological collection from the ruins on Epsilon Prime under the guise of protecting artifacts from atmospheric contamination. Each evacuation looked routine and boring to alien observers. Humans were always moving equipment around and filing paperwork about safety protocols and maintenance schedules. The aliens had grown so accustomed to human efficiency that they stopped paying attention to the details. Kate smiled as she read the latest report from Captain Dan Foster, who was overseeing the withdrawal from the Outer Rim territories. The massive orbital platforms that protected neutral worlds were being shut down for what the paperwork called mandatory safety upgrades. The alien worlds below had no idea that their shields and defensive systems would never come back online. The most critical part of the operation was removing human personnel without causing alarm. Families received coded messages through entertainment broadcasts that looked like normal programming. A cooking show might mention that viewers should remember to pack their favorite recipes for upcoming family gatherings. A sports broadcast could include comments about how important it was to bring essential items when traveling to see relatives. Human children across the galaxy began staying home from alien schools with mysterious illnesses that always seemed to require extended recovery time on Earth. Human workers started taking accumulated vacation days that they had been saving for years. Human military personnel received transfers to training programs that just happened to be located in Sol System. The aliens noticed nothing unusual because humans had always been mobile compared to other species. While most aliens spent centuries in the same location, humans moved around constantly for work and family reasons. The gradual disappearance of human faces from daily life seemed normal. Kate's aide, Commander Lisa Parker, approached with another status report. Lisa had been Jake Harrison's deputy during the disastrous council meeting 3 months ago, and she understood exactly why Protocol 7 was necessary. "Admiral, we have confirmation from all sector commanders," Lisa said. "Phase 1 withdrawal is 60% complete. Human civilian populations are being evacuated on schedule, and military assets are being relocated to fallback positions." "Any problems with the aliens?" Kate asked. "None so far." The Zephyrians actually thanked Commander Stevens for his years of service when he left. They gave him a medal for maintaining their defense grid, Lisa reported with barely concealed amusement. Kate shook her head. The Zephyrians had no idea that their defense grid would collapse within weeks, once the human-designed components started failing without proper maintenance. The aliens had grown so dependent on human technical support that they could not imagine how their systems would function without it. The communication systems were particularly vulnerable. Human engineers had spent decades integrating alien technology with human innovations to create networks that actually worked efficiently. Once the humans left, the elegant solutions would break down into chaos as incompatible systems tried to communicate with protocols they no longer understood. Medical facilities across the galaxy would face similar problems. Human doctors had not just treated patients, they had trained alien medical staff and maintained the advanced diagnostic equipment that had revolutionized galactic healthcare. Without human expertise, treatable conditions would become fatal, and alien doctors would watch helplessly as their patients died from diseases they no longer knew how to cure. The transportation networks would collapse next. Human logistics officers had created shipping schedules and supply chains that kept goods flowing smoothly between hundreds of worlds. They understood which routes were efficient and which alien bureaucracies required special handling. Once they were gone, trade would slow to a crawl as alien merchants struggled to navigate systems they had never bothered to learn. Kate looked at the holographic display again and watched as more blue dots winked out. Each disappearing light represented another piece of human civilization being pulled back to safety. Soon the aliens would be left with the galaxy they claimed to have built. But without the humans who had actually made it function, she wondered how long it would take them to realize what they had lost. The first warning signs appeared on a Tuesday morning when the freight shipments to the Perseus Arm failed to arrive on schedule. Traffic controller Vexanala stared at her screens, showing empty shipping lanes where human cargo vessels should have been delivering food and manufactured goods to 17 different worlds. She tried contacting the human shipping companies, but received only automated messages saying that services were temporarily suspended for fleet maintenance. 6 months had passed since the human evacuation began, and the aliens were starting to notice that something was wrong. The changes came slowly at first, like a disease that spreads through a body without obvious symptoms, until it was too late to stop. Captain Dan Foster stood on the bridge of his cruiser, watching the last human transport convoy disappear into hyperspace. Behind them, the massive orbital defense platforms that had protected neutral worlds for decades began shutting down their weapon systems and shield generators. The automated shutdown sequence would take another week to complete, giving the platforms enough time to purge their databases and wipe their navigation computers clean. Dan had volunteered to stay behind with a skeleton crew to oversee the final phase of the withdrawal. It was dangerous work because once the aliens realized what was happening, they might try to stop the remaining humans from leaving. But someone had to make sure that no human technology or personnel fell into alien hands during the confusion that would surely follow. On the Council homeworld, the first power grid failures started in the industrial district with the fusion reactors. Designed by human engineers, required daily maintenance to function properly. The alien technicians, who had worked alongside humans for years, suddenly found themselves staring at control panels they did not understand when the reactors began showing error messages in human technical language. Plant supervisor Kethfer had always assumed that the humans were just following procedures when they performed their daily inspections and adjustments. He never bothered to learn what they were actually doing because humans seemed to enjoy tedious technical work that bored most aliens. Now the reactor was making alarming sounds and displaying warnings that the translation computers could not interpret. The medical facilities were experiencing similar problems. Dr. Yul Thara had relied on human colleagues to operate the advanced diagnostic equipment that could detect diseases at the cellular level. The machines were still functioning, but when they broke down or needed calibration, there were no humans available to fix them. The alien medical staff discovered that the user manuals were written in technical human language that was almost impossible to translate accurately. In the Zephyrian star system, the asteroid defense network that Commander Rick Stevens had designed and maintained for 8 years began showing system failures. The early warning satellites that detected incoming objects were going offline one by one as their human-built components failed without proper maintenance. Navigation Officer Zeph Kor tried to contact the human engineers, who usually handled such problems, but found that all their communication channels had gone silent. The shipping delays were getting worse as alien logistics officers struggled to manage supply chains that humans had organized and maintained for decades. Routes that had been efficient and profitable under human management became chaotic as alien captains got lost in bureaucratic maze that they had never needed to understand before. Cargo ships sat in spaceports for weeks, waiting for clearance from officials who no longer had human assistants to help them process the paperwork. President Carol Newton stood in the newly constructed command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched reports flowing in from across human space. The evacuation was ahead of schedule and proceeding smoothly, but the real test would come when the aliens finally realized what was happening. "How long before they figure it out?" asked General Paul Clark, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Not long now," Carol replied. "The Zephyrians are already asking questions about their defense grid, and the Council is starting to notice the shipping problems. I give it maybe 2 more weeks before someone connects the dots." The truth was that Carol had been planning for this moment since she took office 4 years ago. The writing had been on the wall even then as the Galactic Council became increasingly hostile to human interests. Protocol 7 had been developed as insurance against the day when humanity might need to cut ties with galactic civilization entirely. The protocol was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of making dramatic announcements or issuing ultimatums, humans would simply disappear from galactic society as quietly as they had entered it 50 years earlier. The aliens could keep their counsel and their sense of superiority, while humanity found new friends among the unexplored regions of the galaxy. Engineer Amy Walsh was supervising the shutdown of the orbital manufacturing station above Proxima Centauri when her alien counterpart finally asked the question she had been expecting for weeks. "Where are all the humans going?" asked Maintenance Chief Turval as he watched another transport ship dock with the station. "Home," Amy replied simply. "We are all going home." "But why now?" Turval pressed. "The station is operating perfectly, and production quotas are being met." Amy looked at the alien who had worked beside her for 3 years, without ever bothering to learn her name or ask about her family. To Turval, she had just been another piece of equipment that helped keep the station running smoothly. "Because home is where we belong," she said. The manufacturing station would shut down permanently once Amy and her team left. The alien workers could operate the basic assembly lines, but they had no idea how to maintain the quantum fabricators or repair the molecular assemblers that made the station profitable. Within a month, the facility would be producing nothing but scrap metal and broken components. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as the last human personnel prepared to leave their posts. Teachers were resigning from schools where they had educated alien children for years. Scientists were abandoning research projects that were months away from breakthrough discoveries. Military officers were transferring command of defensive installations to alien replacements who did not understand how the systems actually worked. The aliens still did not grasp the scope of what was happening because they had never bothered to learn exactly what humans did in their society. They saw the departures as individual decisions rather than part of a coordinated withdrawal that would leave galactic civilization crippled and defenseless. Soon they would understand, but by then it would be too late to stop what they had set in motion through their own arrogance and blindness. The emergency alarms in the council chambers had been screaming for 6 hours when Speaker Zethkar finally admitted that the galaxy was facing its worst crisis in 1,000 years. The harvester drones had emerged from dark space exactly as the ancient records predicted, but this time there was no early warning system to detect their approach, and no coordinated defense fleet to stop them. 1 year had passed since humanity began its quiet exodus, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. The mechanical swarm had already consumed 3 star systems on the outer rim, turning planets into raw materials for building more drones. Under normal circumstances, the Council would have detected the harvesters weeks before they reached inhabited space. But the sensor networks that Jake Harrison's people had built and maintained were now dark and silent. Counselor Vexthil stood before the emergency session, looking older and more desperate than anyone had ever seen him. His blue skin had turned pale, and his usual arrogance had been replaced by barely controlled panic. "We must contact Earth immediately," he declared to the assembled delegates. "The humans have the technical expertise we need to restore our defensive systems." The irony was not lost on anyone present. These were the same aliens who had spent years telling humans to be patient and grateful for the privilege of serving their betters. Now they were begging for help from the species they had dismissed as inferior newcomers. Intelligence. Officer Merken stepped forward with a datapad containing the latest reports from human space. "All attempts to establish communication with Earth have failed. The human embassy has been abandoned, and their diplomatic channels are no longer responding to our signals." Zethkar's yellow eyes narrowed as the full scope of the situation became clear. "Are you telling me that an entire species has simply vanished from galactic civilization?" "Not vanished," Merken replied carefully. "Withdrawn. Our analysis suggests that the humans have systematically evacuated all personnel and equipment from Council space over the past 12 months. They appear to have relocated beyond the explored regions of the galaxy." The chamber erupted in angry voices as the delegates realized what had happened. The humans had not abandoned their posts randomly or individually as the Council had assumed. They had planned and executed the largest evacuation in galactic history, while the aliens sat in their chambers arguing about trade regulations and territorial disputes. On the frontier world of Kepler 9, Governor Silvara watched helplessly as the food riots spread through the capital city. The hydroponic farms that had fed the planet for decades were failing because the human agricultural specialists who designed and maintained them were gone. The alien technicians could operate the basic systems, but they had no idea how to repair complex nutrient recyclers or diagnose problems with the atmospheric processors. The medical situation was even worse. Dr. Kilthane had been the planet's chief physician for 20 years, but he had always relied on human colleagues to operate the advanced diagnostic equipment and develop treatment protocols for new diseases. Now children were dying from infections that should have been easily curable, while alien doctors stared at machines they could not understand. Similar disasters were unfolding across hundreds of worlds as the infrastructure that humans had built and maintained began to collapse. Power grids failed as fusion reactors shut down without proper maintenance. Transportation networks ground to a halt as alien pilots discovered that the navigation systems they had depended on were no longer functional. Communication arrays went silent as the quantum entanglement networks that connected distant systems required adjustments that only human engineers knew how to perform. Admiral Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship in orbit around Earth's moon and watched the Council's desperate attempts to re-establish contact. Her communications officer had been monitoring their transmissions for weeks as the alien governments became increasingly frantic. "They are trying every frequency we have ever used," reported Lieutenant Commander Ryan Cooper. "Some of their messages are offering full Council membership and equal representation in exchange for immediate assistance." Helen smiled coldly as she remembered the years of condescension and dismissal that humans had endured. "Tell me, Lieutenant, what did Counselor Vexthal say about young species learning patience?" "He said they should be grateful for the privilege of serving their betters," Ryan replied. "Then perhaps he should practice what he preached," Helen said. "Let them learn patience while they figure out how to survive without us." The offers from the Council were becoming more desperate by the day. Full membership with voting rights equal to the founding species. Positions of authority in all major galactic institutions. Access to alien technology that had been restricted to elder races for millions of years. Everything that humanity had asked for during 50 years of diplomatic negotiations was suddenly being offered freely, but it was too late. The humans had moved on and found new friends among the species beyond the galactic rim. The Wanderers were an ancient race that had left Council space eons ago when they grew tired of the political games and territorial squabbles. They judged others by their contributions and character, rather than by how long they had been part of galactic civilization. The builders were master engineers who respected human innovation and ingenuity. They had welcomed human refugees with open arms and were already collaborating on projects that would revolutionize technology throughout their region of space. The healers were a peaceful species that valued human medical knowledge and had offered to share their own advanced techniques for treating diseases that affected multiple species. President Carol Newton had received reports from the first human expeditions to these new regions, and the news was encouraging. The species they encountered were genuinely interested in cooperation and mutual benefit rather than dominance and exploitation. They saw diversity of thought and culture as strengths rather than threats to their established order. Back in Council Space, the Harvester drones continued their relentless advance toward the core worlds. Without the early warning networks and defensive platforms that humans had maintained, the aliens were fighting blind against an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for centuries. Some Council members suggested surrendering valuable outer worlds to slow the Harvester advance while they rebuilt their defenses. Others proposed evacuating entire populations to safer systems until the crisis passed. But all their plans required technical expertise and logistical coordination that had walked away with the humans. Seth Kar stood alone in his private chambers, staring out at the city lights that flickered and dimmed as another power grid failed. For the first time in his long life, he understood what it meant to be truly helpless. 2 years after humanity disappeared from Council space, Speaker Seth Kar stood before the remnants of what had once been the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. Only 12 of the original 47 member species still attended the emergency sessions, and most of those were too busy fighting for survival to care about political ceremonies. The Harvester invasion had consumed 23 star systems before finally burning itself out in the resource-poor regions near the Galactic Rim. 3 founding species had declared independence from the Council and were now fighting bitter territorial wars with their former allies. The elegant trade networks that had connected hundreds of worlds for millennia had collapsed into chaos. As alien merchants struggled to navigate shipping routes they had never bothered to learn, Seth Kar looked older than his 800 years as he addressed the nearly empty chamber. His once proud reptilian features were marked by stress and exhaustion, and his yellow eyes held the hollow look of someone who had watched his entire civilization crumble. "We have received another communication from the human territories," he announced to the few remaining delegates. "They continue to decline our offers of alliance and mutual cooperation." The offers had become increasingly desperate over the past months. Full Council membership with veto power over all decisions. Exclusive trading rights to the richest systems in the galaxy. Access to alien technology that had been hoarded by the elder races for millions of years. Everything that humanity had requested during 50 years of diplomatic negotiations was now being offered freely, along with privileges that no species had ever been granted before. But the humans were no longer interested in what the Council had to offer. They had found something better beyond the explored regions of space. Captain Tim Morgan stood on the bridge of the human cruiser Horizon as it approached the edge of what had once been Council territory. His ship bore the insignia of the United Terran Republic, the new government that had been established in the Wanderer territories with the help of humanity's alien allies. Tim had been Jake Harrison's aide during the final diplomatic mission to the Council 3 years ago, and he remembered every insult and dismissive gesture that the aliens had directed toward humanity. Now he carried a message that would officially end any hope of reconciliation between humans and their former overlords. The communication broadcast began on all frequencies as Tim activated the ship's transmission array. Every functioning receiver in Council space would hear his words, from the grand chambers of the founding worlds to the struggling colonies on the frontier. This is Captain Tim Morgan of the United Terran Republics, speaking for all humanity. He began in a calm, professional voice. We acknowledge receipt of the Galactic Council's repeated requests for alliance and mutual assistance. In the Council chambers, the remaining delegates leaned forward in their seats as they listened to the first human voice they had heard in over a year. Some looked hopeful while others appeared resigned to disappointment. After careful consideration by our government and our new allies, we must respectfully decline your offers, Tim continued. The United Terran Republic has no interest in resuming diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council at this time. The words hit the alien delegates like physical blows. Several stood up from their seats in shock, while others simply stared at the communication screens in disbelief. They had offered humanity everything they possessed, and it still was not enough. But Tim was not finished. His next words would deliver the final blow to any remaining hope of human assistance. We have found new friends among the stars, he said. Species that judge others by their character and contributions rather than by how long they have held power. The Wanderers, the Builders, and the Healers have welcomed humanity into a confederation based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. The message continued as Tim described a new civilization that humanity was helping to build in the unexplored regions beyond Council space. Advanced technologies were being shared freely between species that valued innovation over tradition. Medical knowledge was being exchanged to benefit all members of the Confederation rather than being hoarded by elite groups. Trade was conducted fairly, with profits shared according to contribution rather than political influence. It was everything the Galactic Council claimed to be, but had never actually practiced. We wish the Council success in their future endeavors, Tim concluded. Perhaps this experience will teach them to value cooperation over domination and respect over arrogance. The transmission ended, leaving the council chambers in stunned silence. The few remaining delegates sat in their seats, staring at the dark communication screens as the full implications of the message sank in. Humanity was never coming back. They had moved on to better things while their former masters were left to face the consequences of their own actions. Counselor Vexthul was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. They found new allies. How is that possible, Intelligence? Officer Merkin consulted his datapad with shaking hands. Our long-range scouts have detected massive construction projects in the regions where the humans relocated. It appears they have allied with several species that left council space in previous millennia. A combined population of their confederation now exceeds our remaining membership. A cruel irony was impossible to ignore. The council had dismissed humanity as a young species that needed guidance from their elders. But the humans had found truly ancient races that possessed wisdom and technology far beyond anything the council had achieved. The Wanderers alone were older than the founding species of the council, and they had chosen to work with humanity as equals rather than treating them as servants. Zeeth Kar stood slowly from his ceremonial chair and looked around the empty chamber. The floating platforms that had once held representatives from dozens of species now stood vacant and dark. The grand halls that had echoed with the voices of galactic civilization for eons were silent except for the hum of failing life. Support systems dot outside the windows of the council building. The lights of the capital city flickered and went out as another power grid collapsed without human engineers to maintain it. Medical facilities struggled to treat patients without the advanced equipment that human doctors had operated. Schools closed because alien teachers could not use the educational technology that human specialists had developed. The galaxy that had rejected humanity as unworthy was discovering what unworthiness truly meant. They had possessed the greatest treasure in the known universe, a species capable of innovation, dedication, and genuine cooperation, and they had thrown it away because of pride and prejudice. Now they would spend whatever time remained to them, wondering what might have been if they had chosen friendship over superiority. The humans were gone, and they were never coming back.